I guess we're on to review number 4. We are at number 93 in your packet. Treaty of Versailles and the League of Nations. League of Nations was very, very weak. I don't know if we go into that in here. Should have learned that in class. Hopefully you remember a little bit about it. Came together about, it was 1920, and just with the idea that they were going to maintain world peace after World War I. Again, very weak, ended up disbanding around 1946, okay? Treaty of Versailles ended World War I and punished Germany harshly. One of the reasons for World War II. Treaty of Versailles established the League of Nations and the world's first international peacekeeping organization. The United States did not ever sign the Treaty of Versailles and never joined the League of Nations. The Red Scare. Red was the color of communism, still is actually, color of communism. After World War I, the U.S. was very afraid of communists and immigrants. The time period was known as the Red Scare. Attorney General Palmer rounded up suspected communists and deported them. That was called the Palmer Raids. Sacco and Vanzetti were executed for their crimes. Most people thought they were found guilty because they were immigrants, which very well may have been true. History shows us anything. The Roaring Twenties. Consumer goods skyrocketed. The Model T car, radio, washing machines, buying on credit became a thing. It was very rare before this time period. Flappers were the girls who wore the short dresses, cut their hair short, danced and stuff. Prohibition is the banning of alcohol. Of course, everyone knows when something is banned, it doesn't mean it stops. Changing manners and morals. There was a conflict between traditional and modern values. This is something that we see over and over and over again in, throughout history, throughout all of history. Okay, there's always going to be a conflict between the way things were and the new modern thing, the young folks. Okay, so we saw it in the 20s, saw it in the 50s. We definitely saw it in the 60s with the hippies, right? So you're always going to have the younger generation coming up with new ideas and the old folks not liking it. Okay, that's a definitely an enduring issue that we see a lot throughout history. Okay, overproduction of customer goods. Eventually, people didn't need more goods. They already had radios, cars, washing machines. Okay, farm prices were still low because of overproduction. Okay, we had the big bread basket, so in the Midwest, so we had lots of production, right? Economics of the Great Depression. GNP is the gross national product. What that means is the sum value of all goods and services produced in the country. Per capita income, the GNP divided by population. So how much is our net worth divided by how many people there are. Stock speculation was people put a percentage down when they bought shares of stock, and banks were unregulated at this point. That's never a good thing. We've seen that over and over and over again. The Dust Bowl, a 10-year drought and overproduction of farm fields after World War I made many farmers go broke. Massive dust storms resulted. Improvements came with the Agricultural Adjustment Act, the AAA, during the New Deal. Many people moved west in order to get out of the Dust Bowl, especially to California. Okay, this is in the Midwest. I didn't even think about that. Let me look something up for you guys real quick. Lots of stuff on here. Hopefully you've seen pictures of the Dust Bowl, but it's actually pretty crazy. Okay, so there's huge swaths of land, and because of the overproduction, the windstorms out in the Midwest, people's, their entire farms disappeared. There wasn't sun able to get to the crops. Nothing. It was a 10-year drought anyway. It was crazy. Okay, a lot of the pictures from that time are really interesting. Dust clouds rolling over the prairies. Okay, and overproduction and the drought led to dry land. And when the winds came, because they have a lot of hurricanes out there with a big flat land, a lot of destruction. A lot of people lost their land, lost everything. Yeah, so hopefully you've seen those pictures before. Moving on. Trickle-down theory. Again, something we've seen over and over and over again. Herbert Hoover's plan that tax breaks and money given to businesses will trickle down to the people. So businesses get more money, they're able to do better business, they're able to, pay their workers better, they're able to lower their prices. This is a plan that has been used several times and it never works. You'd think they would learn, but no, it's still going on today. Businesses will be able to afford to expand and hire more people. It's typically a Republican plan used by Hoover and failed, and with Reagan with moderate success mostly for the business owners as usual, not the workers. 99 was the New Deal, Franklin D. Roosevelt's plan to get the U.S. out of the Great Depression. Deficit spending. Roosevelt believed the government had to spend money to make money. This is another thing you hear a lot. You might hear, actually, you're going to hear it in economics. I can tell you that right now. But deficit spending, got to spend money to make money. And the 3 R's, relief, recovery, and reform. Stock market crashed, banks crashed, everything was bad for a while. So, relief, recovery, reform. Okay, the New Deal. Roosevelt's court packing scheme. Supreme Court kept declaring parts of the New Deal unconstitutional. Roosevelt wanted to add 6 judges to the Supreme Court so that there would be a majority there that supported his proposals. Congress nixed the plan and said it violated separation of powers and checks and balances. Again, you're going to see this a lot, checks and balances. The branches of the government have to balance each other out. No one person is going to get their way all the time. Okay, and that's why the Constitution was written that way. Okay, so we wouldn't have a dictator again. All right. U.S. neutrality in the 1930s. The U.S. tried to stay out of European affairs in the 1930s, but were increasingly drawn in. Neutrality Acts of 1935 to 1937 were aimed at stopping us from trading with warring countries. The Lend-Lease Act and Destroyers for Bases deal had us helping the Allies without actually sending troops yet. Okay? It's a big deal, something different, instead of just sending people over automatically to fight other people's wars. 102, when we go through the Supreme Court cases, you're going to see this one there as well. Korematsu versus the United States. Fred Korematsu sued over the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. The Supreme Court ruled that in a time of war, the government could do what was necessary to protect the country. So I think they really dropped the ball on this one. World War II, Pearl Harbor, Japanese attacked one of our bases. We retaliated, obviously. So what happened was Japanese-born people and Japanese Americans who had been born here, who were on the West Coast, they made the West Coast into a militarized zone, so they were able to move these people out of their houses. Think Nazi Germany, but actually in the United States, and not actually killing people. Okay, so not quite that bad, but still, a lot of people, 120,000, something around there, of people were moved to these camps out in the desert away from the West Coast, because people were afraid. Japanese had attacked Americans, so they immediately turned their suspicions to people who were here, who looked like that, and they put them into these camps for a few years and they lost their homes and their businesses a lot of the time. They weren't able to get those back. So Fred Korematsu went against the United States in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, well, nope, it was constitutional because in a time of war, to protect the country, the government can do whatever they deem necessary. 103, women during World War II. Many women joined the armed forces in non-combat roles. Women went to work in war industries. They saved grease, metal, and other things that could help with the war effort. War bonds. Patriotic Americans were expected to spend 10% of their salary and buy war bonds. War bonds gave the government money to fight the war, which would be paid back to the people long after the war. It's cool. The Manhattan Project. Roosevelt initiated the Manhattan Project to build an atomic bomb. The bomb was tested at Los Alamos, New Mexico, and then used on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki to get the Japanese to end World War II. Okay, Pearl Harbor first, then Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The Nuremberg trials. German officials that engineered the Holocaust were put on trial for following World War II, after World War II. It was war, or I was following orders, was not a good enough response. Were they following orders? Absolutely, they were following orders. But nobody spoke out. Nobody went against the Nazis, and if they did, they were killed. And there just weren't enough people who were, who were willing to speak out on things that were wrong, okay? So these people who were just normal citizens got wrapped up in the Nazi Party and committed atrocities, and they were held to task for. A lot of them were. Says leaders were responsible for individual action. So if you've got people speaking out against you because you were the leader of a concentration camp, then you were going to be held responsible for those actions. Okay, that was the Nuremberg trials. The GI Bill. The GI Bill was to help American soldiers re-enter U.S. society by giving them loans to buy houses and money to go to college or trade school. They still do this today, GI Bill. In return for your service, they give you college loans, they help you with veterans buying houses and things like that. So it's good if that's something you want to do. 108, containment and the domino theory. Containment was when we felt that we needed to stop the spread of communism. Can't talk today. Communism. You hear me say that a lot. I say that a lot in class too. Domino theory. If one nation falls to communism, so will another, and eventually that will threaten American liberty. It's a problem that people are having now too. Think about history. It's always repeating itself. That's why it's really good to know what was in the past so that we don't repeat it. Okay? 109, the Marshall Plan, Truman Doctrine, and the Eisenhower Doctrine. Okay? The Marshall Plan, which you're probably going to hear about in your test, so pay attention. Marshall Plan, give money to war-torn Europe to help with the war recovery, basically so they didn't have to turn to communists for help. Truman Doctrine is definitely something you might hear about. They gave money to Greece and Turkey for war recovery so that they wouldn't have to turn to communists for help. This ties into the domino theory, right? One falls down, they're just going to fall down one after the other because everybody's poor and broken down and trying to rebuild their countries after war, okay? The Eisenhower Doctrine, same goes, but to the Middle East. Okay? Definitely things you might need to know on your test. Berlin airlift. Soviets tried to cut off the city of Berlin. Western countries responded with more than 200,000 flights of food, medicine, and supplies. What comes after that? Korean War. 1950 to 1953 was containment, like we said, trying to keep communism in one place without letting it spread. Following World War II, Korea was divided into communist north and a democratic south at the 38th parallel. North Korea invaded South Korea. United Nations forces led by General MacArthur worked to defeat North Korea. He was actually fired by publicly criticizing how Harry Truman wouldn't just use another A-bomb and end the war quickly. Okay, atomic bomb. And he criticized Truman for not doing it. The U.S. never declared war on Korea. War ended with a ceasefire. U.S. troops still guard the border between the North, which are communist, and South Korea at the 38th parallel. Still have troops there to this day. That happened in 1950 to 1953. 50 was the year my mom was born. Way before my time. Communist hysteria. Anytime you have something different going on, people are going to freak out. Okay? We were afraid of communists. House Un-American Activities Committee, the HUAC, looked for communists in government. The government searched for communists in the movie industry, the Hollywood 10. A lot of people were blacklisted at this point, and they weren't able to work after this because they were dubbed communists, okay? Especially in Hollywood. Ethel and Julius Rosenberg were executed for giving atomic secrets to the Soviet Union. Ethel and Julius Rosenberg, you might hear about them. And then Senator Joseph McCarthy accused many people as being card-carrying communists. When he went after the army, he had gone too far and was issued a public censure. He was told to stop. The baby boom. Generation of children born after World War II. Veterans, or born to World War II veterans, were known as the baby boom. Okay? Many veterans came home to have large families. Grandma had 7 kids. Baby boom generation, you hear about people today with that many kids, though. I mean, not a lot. Most people have like 1 or 2. Baby boom generations put a strain on educational resources. More schools need to be built in the 50s and then colleges by the late 60s. The baby boom generation is nearing retirement now and will stress the Social Security system. That's happening right now. The growth of suburbs, affordable housing subsidized by the GI Bill, so all those people who fought in wars, right, World War II, Korea, came back and they were eligible for the GI Bill. So we had to have more construction workers, we had to have public service workers to build more highways. There was construction of the interstate highway system during Eisenhower's administration. And then people were able to work in cities and live in the suburbs. White flight. I don't know if you ever heard of this before, but basically what that means is the whites moved out of cities. Okay, most African Americans stayed in the cities, and whites moved out to the suburbs. The Cuban Missile Crisis and the Bay of Pigs invasion. Remember, we had gotten Cuba and then given them their independence, but then kept a close watch on what they were doing. Okay, so this is under John F. Kennedy. The Bay of Pigs. The U.S. helped train a group of Cuban exiles to go overthrow Fidel Castro in Cuba. It failed and was an embarrassment to JFK's administration. Okay, so Fidel Castro, you're going to hear about him. Cuban Missile Crisis, also a Bay of Pigs if you ever... If you like Billy Joel, should be playing that right now. Actually, I'll probably do that in class. Cuban Missile Crisis. Soviets under Nikita Khrushchev tried to put nuclear missiles in Cuba, which is close to the United States. JFK ordered an embargo, and Khrushchev turned his ships around. It really was not that simple. It went on for a little bit, and people were very, very scared. They really thought that we were going to be, there was going to be nuclear war, and it was going to be coming right from Cuba, which is very close to Florida. Okay. Yeah, we're going to skip that. We're going to keep going. 116, Peace Corps. JFK told the American people, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." And he created the Peace Corps, which was an international volunteer organization. Volunteers spread good democratic values. They help nations in need, building houses and things like that. So it's a good group. Okay. Martin Luther King Jr. I'm sure you've heard of him. And on this test, you could actually write about Martin Luther King Jr. Not when they ask you on the Global about Martin Luther from the Lutheran Church. He created it, and kids write about Martin Luther King Jr. instead. Now you're in U.S. history. You can write about Martin Luther King Jr. if they're asking about him. Okay? He was a Southern minister who worked for civil rights for Black Americans. He led the Montgomery bus boycott, and I'm sure you've heard his I Have a Dream speech, or at least part of it, and he organized the March on Washington. Okay? Very famous guy. You know all about him. We have a day to commemorate him. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed by Lyndon Johnson after JFK died. Well, he was assassinated. Landmark legislation ruled that all racial discrimination and segregation was illegal. It created the Equal Opportunity Commission to investigate cases of discrimination. This is not until 1964. Okay? 1964, when they finally completely banned discrimination and segregation. It was still going on in the South. Okay? The Voting Rights Act of 1965 extended the right to vote to blacks who had been denied the vote through poll taxes, literacy tests, grandfather clauses, etc. These are leftovers of the Jim Crow laws. Remember, Jim Crow is not a person. Okay? He was actually like a caricature, like the black stage actor caricature. Yeah, blackface. So Jim Crow laws were these laws that were put into effect by the states, mostly southern states, I'll say that, to get around the federal laws. Okay, federal law says blacks have the right to vote. Sure, they can vote if they can pay the poll tax. Sure, those slaves that were freed can vote if they know how to read. Slaves weren't allowed to be taught how to read, so yeah, they found ways around it. So this isn't until 1965, so it's a very long time. Any method used to limit the right of blacks to vote was ruled illegal. This is when people started to pay for the way they were behaving. Okay. Great Society, Lyndon Johnson's plan to help the urban poor. Compared to the New Deal as a Democratic plan, it spent lots of money on social welfare programs, okay? Lots of money trying to bring people up, take care of the poor, okay? The feminine mystique. Okay, 1962 was written by Betty Friedan, who founded the National Organization for Women, now that's still around today. So that not all women wanted to stay home and cook and clean. Some wanted to be teachers. No, I'm just kidding. Well, some did want to be teachers, but yeah. Some want to be lawyers or, go for president. Whoever, whatever. Lawyers and doctors and things. Moving on. Gulf of Tonkin Resolution and the War Powers Act. We're still on Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson told Congress that Vietnamese gunboats in the Gulf of Tonkin near Vietnam, obviously, had fired on U.S. naval ships. Congress gave Johnson full authority to retaliate. U.S. troops in Vietnam increased heavily. The War Power Acts of 1973, Ms. Morton still wasn't born yet, limited the president's ability to commit troops in wartime. President can send troops for 60 days, and after that, Congress has to approve it. Okay, so this is a limit on the president's ability to send tons and tons of troops over to another country during wartime, okay? 60 days he can send them over for, and then Congress has to approve or deny what he's doing, okay? Detente. President Nixon's plan to ease the Cold War tensions between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. Examples were the SALT talks, visit to China and the USSR. Roe v. Wade, 1973, was a landmark Supreme Court case ruling that a woman's right to an abortion is protected in the right to privacy. Okay, it's been expanded into HIPAA since then, but Roe v. Wade is a huge Supreme Court case, still being argued today. Not in the Supreme Court necessarily, might be in the Supreme Court. They have a lot of things in their docket. Again, once you get into like participation in government and things like that, we'll be dealing with court cases. But this is one you should probably know. Just it's a newer one. I know the court cases that we're going to go through were landmark cases that were a little bit. No, they went to the round this time, but this isn't one of them. So it's probably something you should know. Roe v. Wade. I don't remember ever seeing this on a U.S. history exam, but again, it is U.S. history, 1973, 2 years before Miss Morton was born. Okay, so it's good to know. Okay, woman's right to an abortion protected under the right to privacy. Watergate. Oh, Nixon. The committee to re-elect the president, CREEP, C-R-E-E-P, broke into Watergate Towers, the Democratic Party headquarters. Nixon ordered a cover-up, and then facing certain impeachment, Nixon resigned. It weakened people's faith in elected officials. Okay, this is when Nixon was going to be impeached. Instead, he decided to resign. Rights of the accused. Oh, this is one of these where we talk about Miranda versus Arizona and when we go over the cases. Miranda versus Arizona. You must be read your rights to remain silent to an attorney, things like that. Okay, they're called your Miranda rights. Up until this point, cops, if you were arrested, police could question you for hours and hours and hours, as long as they wanted to question you. Now, you could be quiet, you could remain silent, but they were able to do whatever they wanted to do. Okay, Miranda versus Arizona was where you could remain silent, but it ruled that you had to be told that you had the right to remain silent, and then if you decide to remain silent, they can't question you anymore. Okay, and then Gideon versus Wainwright is along the same lines. A right to an attorney, even if you can't afford one. I should probably put that in there. Even if you can't afford one, that became part of the Miranda rights as well. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be held against you in a court of law. You have a right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed to you. I've never actually been read my Miranda rights, I don't think. So I don't know them. I don't know if there's any more to it, but I know that much. I watch Law and Order. Okay. These cases were heard under Earl Warren's Supreme Court and furthered the rights of the accused. Okay, this is expansion on the rights of the accused. Someone might have done something wrong, but they still have rights. Okay, Gideon versus Wainwright, Miranda versus Arizona.